Welcome everybody to the February issue or February edition of BioStock Live from Stockholm. Today we have an interesting program. We have 4 biotech or specialty pharma companies who are going to present today. We are going to hear presentations from companies working with Alzheimer's disease, kidney protection when heart surgery, and also we have autoimmune diseases, and actually we have a company that could be familiar to our US watchers, Orexo, who are working with the opioid crisis, or to avoid the opioid crisis, I should say. First out to present today is Johan Sandin, CEO of AlzeCure Pharma, who are tackling the big problem with Alzheimer's disease. Welcome, Johan.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for both the introduction, but also the opportunity to come here to present AlzeCure Pharma to you here today. Now, we're a biotech company developing novel therapies for Alzheimer's disease and other severe disorders. Now, AlzeCure Pharma was founded in 2016, but was spun out of the AlzeCure Foundation, which stems back to 2012. We are based at the Karolinska Institutet in the Stockholm area, and the company consists of a team with highly experienced industry drug discovery professionals. We also have a strong network of key opinion leaders that we work very closely with, including Professor Bengt Wienblad at the Karolinska Institutet. We have 2 key product platforms in the company. One, it's called NeuroRestore, is targeting novel symptomatic treatments for cognitive disorders. And the other one is called Alzstatin, which is a novel disease-modifying treatment for Alzheimer's disease. And we have 5 candidates in our project pipeline, as I will show you later on. AlzeCure Pharma is listed on Nasdaq's First North Premier since November last year, and we have a market cap of 350 million. Obviously, being a small company, it's very important for us to have a strong and competent team, and I'm really happy to say that we do have a very experienced team, both in the founders and management team with many years of experience in drug discovery industry, specifically in this area, but also in the board of directors, where we have competencies both on the clinical operations side, marketing, but also on private equity. Now, Alzheimer's disease is, as you may know, the most common form of dementia and counts about 60 to 70% of all forms of dementia. And today's about 50 million people are affected worldwide, which results in enormous socioeconomical costs, counting to close to $1 trillion this year alone. Unfortunately, for this deadly disorder, there are very limited therapeutic options available, and there is a very strong medical need both for better symptomatics in the field, but certainly so also for disease-modifying compounds that can prevent or even potentially cure the disease. Given the huge unmet medical need in this area, it's no surprise that a disease-modifying treatment is estimated to achieve at least $10 billion in annual sales. Now, if we have a look at the Alzheimer's disease brain, you will find a number of key pathological features, 2 of which are the formation and aggregation of a protein called amyloid beta in the brain, forming these characteristic aggregates and eventually plaques in the brain that are easily visible. Another feature is the dysfunction and loss of nerve cells and synapses in the brain, which actually cause the symptoms of the disease. Now, these cardinal features is specifically what we're targeting with our 2 different product platforms, NeuroRestore and Alzstatin. both of them being small molecule programs. NeuroRestore, which is a novel cognitive enhancer for cognitive disorders, and where we have ACD855, the first candidate in that project, currently in phase 1. Interesting possibility with this platform that I'll come back to later on is that there are multiple indications that are possible. Alzstatin is a disease-modifying platform targeting the actual production of these amyloid beta peptides that aggregate in the brain. And here, this is we have 2 candidates that are currently in discovery and preclinical phase. And if we start with the NeuroRestore program, as you may know, neurons, nerve cells or neurons in the brain are highly dependent on specific growth factors for their function and survival. The most known forms are BDNF and NGF, which binds to specific receptors and mediate important functions in the cell, such as to stimulate neuronal communication, enhance neuronal function, survival, and neuroprotection. But it also plays a critical role at the system level to support cognitive function of the organism. Now, in Alzheimer's disease, these systems are disturbed, and what our compounds do is that they enhance the signaling of these systems and normalize the function of the system, and thereby restore neuronal communication, which we've been able to show in preclinical experiments, but also, more importantly, restore cognitive function, which we've also been able to show in a number of animal models. Given the broad effect profile of this target mechanism, this means that this system also has a potential for other indications. There are actually both strong scientific rationale but also genetic linkages to other disorders. And one of them obviously being cognitive impairments in Alzheimer's disease, which is a primary indication for this program, but certainly so also in Parkinson's, in traumatic brain injury, but also in certain sleep disorders. Another interesting area is around depression, where we have good, strong preclinical data in models of depression. There is also a very strong scientific rationale for this mechanism in depression. We also have specific orphan indications in the ear and eye that are directly linked to this mechanism of action. And we have then different candidates targeting these different indications. So I think here's a very interesting market opportunity in multiple indications for this program. The second program is called Alzstatin, and this is targeting the production of the amyloid in the brain. And about a decade ago, we didn't know that much about actually progression of the disease, but we learned the last decade that A-beta is actually accumulated some 10 to 15 years before symptom onset. So the disease starts much earlier than the symptoms appear. And here you can see on the red line the A-beta amyloid being formed over time, and over here you start seeing symptoms. So that also indicates that we have a much better possibility to actually affect the progression of the disease the earlier we go into the disease and prevent these secondary and tertiary events of the disease. And this is also what we've seen now in various types of clinical trials, that you go into earlier patient populations such as mild cognitive impairment or even pre-symptomatically in high-risk populations. And that's also shown to have better clinical efficacy, as shown now with BAN2401 or aducanumab, for example. Now, Alzstatin targets the production of these A-beta because amyloid is formed by the sequential cleavage of a protein called APP. And there are 2 enzymes that cleaves out this final sticky toxic peptide called A-beta 42. which over time forms aggregates such as oligomers, protofibrils, and eventually these amyloid plaques in the brain. And these aggregates are toxic to the nerve cells. Now our compound binds to the last enzyme in this process and modulates how this enzyme functions, so that rather than forming these sticky toxic A-beta-42 peptides, shorter fragments are formed that are non-toxic and do not form these aggregates. Moreover, we have also shown that these smaller fragments actually seems to have an inhibitory effect on forming these larger aggregates, so it actually has a dual function. We've also been able to show the compound has good effects in animal models, lowering the amount of these sticky and toxic A-beta-42 peptides. The mechanism has strong genetic support. Actually, the majority of all inherited forms of Alzheimer have a mutation in this specific enzyme. And importantly, it spares the normal function of the enzyme, so it has a better safety profile than several of the enzyme inhibitors. And being a small molecule, it's easy to administer oral tablets, as well as having a low cost of goods. And this shows you our pipeline, where we have 3 candidates in the New Restore program, ACD855 being furthest. We started clinical trials in December last year. And then we have 2 programs in the alstatin program, one which is in preclinical stage and the other one in discovery phase. And this is just the key take-home messages. We are, as a company, targeting an area of huge unmet medical need. The programs are based on strong science with first-in-class properties and potential to become true game changers in the field. And it's backed up by a strong team with extensive experience from the field, and we're targeting a multi-billion euro market opportunity. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for interesting presentation.
Okay.
I'm going to find my papers first of all. There you go. So as a fairly young company, having been listed late last year, you have quite a long history of research in Alzheimer's area, and your background is from AstraZeneca, is that correct?
Yes, actually all of us founders were at AstraZeneca at the CNS unit in Södertälje at the time of the closure of the CNS unit there in 2012. And that was what actually kick-started setting this organization together, because we felt that this is an area obviously with a huge unmet medical need, and we felt that we still had some really good ideas that we wanted to move further with. So I think this was kind of the starting position, and then we didn't start the AlzeCure Pharma until late 2016. So the first one was kind of primarily during the discovery phases of the projects.
And now you have a pipeline. You have 2 separate tracks, so to speak.
Yeah.
You have a New Restore and alstatin. What's the strategy behind these the 2 different parallel tracks?
Well, I think it has to do with, now that we know that this disease has a very long progression, many years, so certainly probably more than 20-25 years, and most likely you will look at different type of treatments during the progression of the disease, while at the very late stages disease modifiers will have a much larger kind of obstacle in trying to prevent further progression of the disease, because certainly there a lot of the neurons have already been lost. So I think symptomatic treatments will still play a very important role in the later stages of disease, while the disease modifiers will certainly come into into play into the earlier phases of the disease. So I think what we're trying to target then is 2 different target populations with our programs.
And given the history within drug development targeted at Alzheimer's, there are a lot of disappointments and failures, to be frank.
Yeah.
And what do you see as the most probable way forward to actually find something that works?
No, I think we've already starting to see some really positive signals now coming out last year, both with Biogen's aducanumab and BioArctic's BAN2401 being 2 examples. I think we're clearly showing that when we go in earlier in the disease progression than we have been before, we start seeing clinical signals. And given the slide I showed you before on the progression of disease, I think as we venture in early in the disease, I think that's where we start to see clinical efficacy. But I also think that in the future we'll see much more of these type of combination treatments, both disease modifiers and symptomatics combined, small molecules and biologics combined, dependent on where you are in the disease progression. I think that's quite likely scenario.
So given the fact that there is a competitive landscape now, with you mentioned a few of the companies working towards the same goal, so to speak, that wouldn't still benefit more patients and probably not be well, competition is good in this field. So.
Yes, and I think that's clearly a necessity as well, because this is a highly complex area. So I think there needs to be different approaches how to target this specific problem. And given the many millions of people that are affected in the disease, there's certainly room for many different type of treatments dependent on where you are in the disease.
But so, I mean, Alzheimer's is a huge market, a huge unmet need. But your new Restore platform actually has the potential for several indications.
Yes.
Could you?
And I think that's a very, I think from a marketing side, I think that's a very interesting opportunity, because there we are not only betting on Alzheimer's disease as an indication, but there are also other indications that could be possible. And I think in the light of that we have multiple candidates here, and we can actually target one candidate for one indication, other indication for another for another candidate for another indication, we could have differential pricing for these. There are different market opportunities, and I think there is a strong scientific rationale for these other indications for the new Restore platform. So I think it's a very interesting and exciting opportunity.
And speaking of excitement, what are you most excited about in AlzeCure right now? What's going to happen next that you like?
Well, I'm obviously very excited about that we did go into the phase 1 studies as planned in December. So I think that's certainly on the kind of next milestone on the horizon, going through the phase 1, but also bringing the alstatin program to the clinic, I think is also going to be highly exciting. And we are developing these backup compounds for other indications as well. So that's also another very interesting opportunity that we'll have more data on this year. So yeah, really exciting year, I think.
We're looking forward to take part of that. Thank you very much, Johan, for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
You're going to have an opportunity to talk more with my colleague Linus in a little while.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Give him a warm hand. Next up is, in my papers, there we have it. Next up is a company based in Lund at Medicon Village, neighbors to BioStock actually. A1M Pharma, and presenting A1M Pharma is fairly newly appointed CEO, Tobias Agervald. Welcome, Tobias.
Thank you. So, thanks everyone. I'm going to start with a simple statement. Here we go. And this simple statement is that oxygen is required for life. And we practically know this because we all use oxygen in the air when we breathe, and we use that oxygen also for energy production. But there's a flip side to the coin of using oxygen for energy production, and that flip side and the downside is that we will also generate so-called free radicals or reactive oxygen species. And if there's an abundance of these reactive oxygen species and free radicals, that will actually elicit a lot of damage to the bodies, to the organs, tissues, and cells. And this is illustrated on this specific slide. To the left, you have a nicely cut, fresh apple that looks good. Once it is exposed to oxygen, it's then converted to a brown, rotten, and definitely less appealing version of the apple. So, oxidative stress. There's a number of different conditions that causes oxidative stress, and A1M Pharma has a particular interest in the kidney because we know that the kidneys are extremely sensitive to oxidative stress. And of course, acute kidney injury, it's not a single disease entity, but there's a lot of different clinical conditions that may cause acute kidney injury, and I've listed the most common here. So for example, surgical procedures, and I will come to that in a minute. Large surgical procedures can cause damage to the kidneys. We know that many medications, such as chemotherapy, also antibiotics, has a direct toxic effects to the kidney. Organ transplantation, and we know that kidney transplantation is very common. There's a huge sort of damage to the organ once you transplant that into the body, simply because of oxidative stress. We also know that infections, large infections, severe infections, and sepsis also can cause acute kidney injury. And one of the major focus for A1M Pharma, as I will come to, is actually to reduce the damaging effects of oxidative stress. Looking at acute kidney injury, we know by epidemiology that there's roughly about 13 million people annually that is affected by some sort of acute kidney injury. This is also associated with very high morbidity and mortality. In severe cases, we need to provide life-supporting dialysis treatment. This can be intermittent, but it could also be a chronic treatment if there is an irreversible and severe damage to the kidney. And subsequently, we also know that these patients usually have a very poor quality of life, and especially if they progress into a chronic kidney disease. Importantly, there's no specific treatments for acute kidney injury. So medically we can provide supportive treatment such as fluid management. We discontinue drugs that is directly toxic to the kidney, but we don't have any drugs that actually address the issue that causes the damage, such as oxidative stress. So I should say a few words about myself, because I very recently joined A1M Pharma. I started from December 1st, and I was appointed then as the Chief Medical Officer. And as already mentioned, mid-January I was appointed as CEO for this company. I have a medical background, so I'm a board-certified specialist, both in internal medicine and nephrology, but I'm also a researcher, and I've performed a lot of basic research and also clinical research. Over the last years, I had a full-time position in industry, so I worked at a company called Astellas. My base was in the Netherlands, and I worked in the global development team. And actually in the therapeutic area that also included nephrology, which is highly relevant, of course, for A1M Pharma. So as you've seen, there's a lot of potentially different patients you could treat if you want to block oxidative stress, which we do with our candidate, which I will come to in a minute. We initially specifically focus on patient group with AKI that is related to cardiac surgery. And there's a good reason for that. So first of all, we think that this mechanism of our lead asset is highly, highly relevant for this patient population. But also we see a lot of development advantages and opportunities here. So I've listed them. So for example, we know that the patients are readily identifiable. There's a lot of patients, we know where to find them at the major university clinics where cardiac surgery is being performed. There's also short treatment duration, which is an advantage for us here, which means we know that essentially everyone who develops acute kidney injury after cardiac surgery, you can see that within 2 to 3 days. That also means that you have a quick readout of your study results, and the treatment duration is usually 1 to 2, maximum 3 days. Another benefit is also that the clinical endpoints that we're looking both in early development and for making decisions about the project in proof of concept studies, but also in later pivotal studies. We know that the clinical endpoints are relatively well defined. We know what to look for to make decisions about the projects and also what it takes to actually register the drug. So overall, we find this an attractive indication for clinical development. Going to the lead asset of the compound, termed Rosgard, and as you can hear from the name, ROS stands for reactive oxygen species, and we want to guard against that. So this is a recombinant variant of an endogenous protein called alpha-1 microglobulin. And A1M has many different functions, and I've listed the main key functions here. So the first one, it actually binds and scavenges directly free radicals, what I mentioned, the reactive oxygen species, but also other components of that. As a consequence, it also has a direct repair mechanism on damaged tissue. We also know that this A1M actually goes into the cell, binds specifically to the mitochondria, so it gives a mitochondrial protection. And this is a very important element in not only acute kidney injuries, but also in chronic kidney injuries, where we see mitochondrial dysfunction as a key element of the pathogenesis of these disorders. So the concept is that we will utilize the endogenous protein, but we will give that in pharmacological amounts at certain conditions where this is insufficient to actually protect against oxidative stress. So I'm going to give you a very simplistic model in patients with cardiac surgery, why we hypothesize that this drug would actually work. So there are two things. So the first one, when you use a heart-lung machine in cardiac surgery, we have something called hemolysis, which is the destruction of red blood cells. And that releases many different things, but one thing that's released is called heme, which has a direct toxicity to the kidney and also oxidizing properties. We also know that during this procedure, in conjunction with the use of a heart-lung machine, but also during the surgery itself, we have repeated small events of ischemia and hypoxia leading to increased oxidative stress. So this means that we can measure this systemically, but also you precipitate this vicious circle within the kidney where you have increased oxidative stress that leads to an inflammatory process that feeds back and also increases the oxidative stress. And ultimately, the outcome may actually be acute kidney injury for a lot of these patients. So Rosgard actually prevents both at the systemic level by direct scavenging of heme and some of the oxidizing properties in the plasma. But also we know that it's filtered in the glomeruli and it homes into the kidney. So when we give this as an infusion, all Rosgard will essentially accumulate in the kidney, which is the place we want to protect. So that's another benefit. So I won't give you a lot of details and show the data, but I will give you a summary of where we are with this lead asset that we are intending to bring into the phase 1 very soon. So we have a very robust preclinical pharmacology package. So we've shown in multiple different models, not only related to acute kidney injury, but also other models, where we have good impact on reducing mortality. We have reduction of biomarkers that are linked to acute kidney injury. We do see an improved renal function as measured by the filtration rates. If we look histologically, we have a reduced tissue damage. We have reduced proteinuria also in a lot of these animal models. And that is important because all these markers are actually used clinically, and we know we can register drugs based on these for primary endpoints in pivotal trials. In general, we have, in November 2018, it was communicated that we received regulatory approval to initiate a phase 1 study. This was approved by the MPA because the study will be conducted in Sweden. This also means we have a well-documented preclinical safety profile. We also established quite recently a large-scale industrial production according to GMP standards of Rosgard. This will be used as an intravenous infusion. So essentially, these are intensive care unit patients. So this is an IV infusion. We also have solid IP protection, both in terms of the medical use and the indications we can operate with recombinant A1M, but also, of course, a matter of composition patent. So overall, I think this is a solid platform to initiate clinical development with this first asset that the company will bring forward. So a few words about the path forward over the next years. So very soon we expect to initiate the phase 1 study, and this is a pretty classical approach to phase 1. This will be conducted in healthy individuals, healthy volunteers. We will start with the first part, which is called a single ascending dose, meaning that you give a small group of healthy volunteers a low dose to start with. If that is safe and well tolerated, then you increase the dose and you go to the next dose level until you reach a predefined exposure cap. So the results will be communicated, or is expected to be communicated, approximately 6 months after the first patient's in. We also plan to initiate the second part of the first-in-human study, which is a multiple ascending dose that follows the same principle, but you give multiple repeated dosing for several consecutive days. We also plan to perform some additional activities within production for drug substance and also do some formulation work around the drug product. In 2020, we expect results also from the second part of the first-in-human study, the multiple ascending dose part. We also will initiate a small phase 1b study, which primarily will be a safety study in patients that undergoes cardiac surgery. That is just to prove the concept that the drug is safe and well tolerated also in these patients. And again, results are expected roughly within 6 months after the treatment start. And further on, we plan to initiate a larger phase 2 study, an effect study in the patients undergoing cardiac surgery. So overall, I think A1M Pharma is prepared. I have a limited time in the company, but I think during that time we've strengthened the competence, especially with expertise in drug development, not only on the medical end, but also on the CMC end. We identified a very attractive initial indication for clinical development with a lot of advantages. We have a well-defined clinical development plan. Of course, this is an early clinical development plan, but also a good tentative development plan, what it looks like in late phase. We also secured funding for the upcoming phase 1 study that I will come to. So again, the initial phase 1 results is hopefully to be communicated roughly 6 months after study start, and we expect that to happen towards the very end of the first quarter this year, so quite soon. And my final slide is just to demonstrate that we have a 100% secured rights issue going on right now in February 2019. I will not give you all the details about this, but there's a prospectus available. You can find it on the homepage. The amounts of issuing is around 70 million Swedish crowns, and that will definitely bring us minimum into January 2020 to support all these activities that I mentioned. The timelines for the secured rights issue it's already started. The prospectus has been published, and the subscription period is ending February 20, which is Wednesday next week. So if you do have an interest in this, please look at the website, look at the prospectus, and see if you find this interesting. And the outcome of this activity will be published roughly around February 26. So I think I will close with that. Thank you again, and I will take any questions.
Thank you, Tobias. I would like to start with a question of my own. Having worked you were at Astellas, which is a global pharma company. What attracted you to come to a small biotech a small biotech like A1M Pharma?
Yeah, so that was a conscious decision. I mean, I've been working over the last 6-7 years in a larger pharmaceutical company. Obviously, that has advantages in terms of especially funding, because once you have a strategy, you define the project, and you have support, and you can actually execute without search for additional funding continuously. On the other hand, I think there's a lot of similarities, because if you go to a small company, then you still have a project and you need to develop that project, and you would, mentally and clinically and think about it at the same way as you would do in a big company. So, and I think that's also a quick way to make decisions. You have more flexibility because there's not a large organization, there's no other competing projects. So I think there's also some benefits to that, and which I appreciate.
And using your previous experience then in clinical development and so on, what do you see as the biggest advantages with the choice of indication that A1M Pharma has now with it?
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, this is a biologic, so we're still working on the ultimate formulation, but of course, there's a relative high cost at this time for production. So having an indication where you can give a short-term treatment, we have, as I've shown, it's only a few days treatment that we expect. You have a quick readout of the study results, and we think really based on the biology that the mode of action is really close to perfect. So I think with that, that really justifies the selection of the primary indication we have now.
And patient recruitment, so on, that will not be a problem in this kind of indication?
No, so we have very good industry benchmarks of what would be the expected recruitment. So again, we know where to find the patients. There's a lot of patients that undergoes cardiac surgery. It's all done at the major clinics. So of course, depending on your final inclusion-exclusion criteria, there might be some variability, but we have a very good understanding of the recruitment pace, which shouldn't cause any problems in terms of delivering patients into the trials.
And thinking about problems and risk mitigation, what are the main, or what's the main challenge that you perceive at this point?
No, so I think the main challenge now is that we simply just need to go into the phase 1 study and start that as soon as possible. I think all the investors and everyone is really waiting for that, and also everyone in the company. So just starting phase 1 and get the first clinical data, I think that would be very exciting with this molecule.
See what it can do.
See what it can do.
Well, given the history of Rosgard, which has been considered for a number of indications earlier, if given that you execute this plan within this indication, how do you look at the possibilities of actually then label widening or going into other indications later?
No, so as I've shown, I think the biology around A1M is extremely interesting, and I think the potential number of indications that could be envisioned based on this concept, it's quite large. And accordingly, I mean, the company has in the past, before my time, performed a lot of different pharmacology studies, not only in kidney injuries, but also in other indications such as preeclampsia. And I think they've all consistently demonstrated a good pharmacological effect. And for me, that typically means that if you can repeat that effect in so many different types of models, that actually indicates that it's probably has some good pharmacology effects. So I think there's a good opportunity for expanding, but now this company needs to focus and we need to execute, and I think this is really an ideal indication for demonstrating a proof of concept. If we're successful, then we can envision both in terms of other subgroups of acute kidney injuries, but also potentially other indications where we have organ damage due to oxidative stress.
And like you said, funding is always an issue, especially in small companies. You're now doing a financing round, fully guaranteed, which is good. You know you're going to have the funds to start and to execute. You attracted some interesting guarantors. Max Mitteregger has a specialty investor here in Sweden, quite famous. That's one. The subscription period stops at, you said next week, was that?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Good to know. For everyone here, can of course grab you in the short break that we have and ask questions. And I know that you also brought some material to give out. Yeah. Thank you very much, Tobias, for an interesting presentation.
Okay, thank you.
So we're actually going to take a short break, 15 minutes, to stretch our legs, and we'll be back at 11. See you then.
jag lyssnar på din introduktion kanske.
Ja. Welcome back. We had a short break here at BioStock Live in Stockholm. Now we will be presented to another two very interesting companies. Next up is the company that, of the four that are here today, has come the furthest in the development. Orexo is a company that actually has products on the market, which is nice. Here to present Orexo today is CEO Nikolaj Sørensen. Nikolaj, take it away.
Thank you very much. And if I may add to that one, I think we're also profitable, which is even nicer. I'm going to talk about Orexo, which is a company in the opioid addiction space. It's probably, I would claim this is the most severe health issue that is facing the US at the moment. It's killing more people than most other diseases, and I actually think in most other diseases, if you break down cancer, for example, I'm pretty sure there's not one single cancer diagnosis that are killing more people than opioids at the moment in the US. So Orexo, we are a Swedish company. We are originating from Uppsala. That's why we have our headquarters. That's why we have the R&D. Started up our US operations in 2013, and today we have about 80 people in the US working predominantly with sales and marketing. It's in Morristown, New Jersey. We have today 4 products that are generating or has been launched and approved. One of them we have sold completely. 2 of them are generating royalties, and then we'll talk mostly about Zubsolv, which is the treatment of opioid dependence, and the one that today generates about 85% of our revenues. As you can see down here, we have a strong revenue. So this is in dollars. So we are a little less than 800 million in SEK. We have an EBITDA which is 116 million Swedish kronor or $13 million in 2018, and we have a very strong cash position of 590 million or $65 million. So in basically where we are today, we are a specialty pharma company. We have products on the market, and the challenge for us now is to fill this pipeline with more commercial products, either through our own development or through business development. However, first I'm just going to take a little step back. For those who followed us know that there are something that's been following us for quite a long time. It's always nice to see that we're one of the best performing stocks on the Stockholm Stock Exchange last year, but it was not so much to the performance than to the decision by the court system in the US to finally validate and find that the competitor Actavis with their product are infringing into their patents. This has costed us more than 200 million Swedish or more than $20 million to run this process, and it's a big relief that we come out victorious and have found that our patents are now valid until 2032. People who know about this will know that when you've been through a court system, your patents are much stronger after they've been validated, especially when you go up to higher court levels like the federal court system. It would be a big challenge for another company to invalidate them. The other thing that we have, and that cost us a decent amount of money now, both in Q4, and it will cost us quite a lot of money now in Q1, but then it will decline significantly, is that we found that the same company that we're fighting up here, Actavis, has actually used our technology to develop 2 other products, Subutex and Suboxone. So we, of course, want to get reimbursed for that or get royalties on the technology that they have taken, and we have sued them for damages in the US, and we have a court which is coming on the 25th of March, is the trial date, and expected to take up to a week. It's a jury trial, so we'll get the decision imminently after. This is something that could generate a lot of money, but I'll also flag it is a court decision, and it's notoriously difficult to predict the outcome of the court system in the US. But we of course do this with the confidence of us seeing that they have infringed into the patent of our patents from, that's called 996 patent that expires in 2019. And if the court agree, then we are subject to a quite big damage claim against Actavis. So Orexo, as a company, when I started, the target for us was to launch a product in the US. It was to become profitable, to build a sustainable business model where we know we can generate income to pay for the development of new products. And that's basically where we are today. We are generating more money than what we need for our R&D. Right now, we're building cash, and that enables us to do business development more aggressively than we could do otherwise. So the focus number one for us right now is to broaden the commercial platform, meaning getting more products into the pipeline, into the hands of our field force in the US. To further strengthen this position, we are in a disease space where only less than a fifth of the patients who are diagnosed actually are in treatment at any given time. We're in a disease space where the number of people in treatment and those who actually have the disease is less than a tenth. So we have 10 to 12 million Americans who suffer from opioid addiction, but it's only about 1 million Americans who are in treatment. So we have a massive growth potential in the segment we're working. And that, of course, is a lot of focus for us to maximize the potential of Zubsolv in the US and continue to grow the EBIT, which is going pretty well in the US. And then we have our R&D pipeline, where early this quarter, we saw the first positive phase 1 data from the next project, but we have 3 other projects that I will talk to right now. So our pipeline, when we do pipeline, we're basically defining a problem, and then we're going out and see which technology solve this problem. Whether it's internal or external or internal is actually not important for us. So do we need to find someone who can do it better externally? We'll do that. If we can do it internally at a better business case, we'll do that. And what we have defined is today all tablets in this market that we are in opioid dependence is so-called sublingual formulations, tablets or films. You put it under the tongue and it has to dissolve within X amount of minutes. In all other disease spaces, patients normally prefer to take a tablet. You can take a glass of water and you just swallow. So we're aiming to develop the first swallowable buprenorphine tablet. That is difficult. Other companies have tried, but I think the other companies come from a technology perspective, say, our technology, maybe we could use that to solve this problem. We're coming from the other angle. We have a problem. What technologies are required to solve it? So I think this one we have right now in vivo tests ongoing, so we'll see how that moves. But it is a difficult biology challenge to solve. Then we have OX124 and OX125, both of them addressing the overdose epidemic we see in the US right now. But the thing with the market in the US is people are not dying from heroin overdose anymore. They're dying from fentanyl. And when you look at the profile of fentanyl and compare it to heroin, you'll see that it's a completely different pharmacokinetic profile. So you need a different overdose reversal agent, something that's faster, more powerful, and have a longer duration. And that's exactly what we aim of doing with OX124 and OX125. OX124, we had positive data in our clinical trial early this year, and we have a product that has shown to be superior to the market-leading product in the US, Narcan, which is selling for about $150 to $200 million. So here we have a lot of hope that this one can make it all the way to the market. We have basically removed the clinical risk of this project. So right now it's more about commercial project and its operations, setting up the manufacturing in a competitive way. Finally, we have OX338, which is a product based on an old NSAID that has today is available as injectable. It's a ketorolac. And here we have done in vivo studies, and we are planning to do a phase 1 trial later this year. So hopefully we can see that we have a product now that could replace morphine and opioids for people who have done procedures. And to give you a little scary number from the US is that of all of those people who took out a wisdom tooth, people are going back in a retrospective study and say how many got opioids after they got the wisdom teeth pulled. And it was about, I think, 45 to 50,000 Americans who have got their wisdom teeth pulled, got a prescribed an opioid to manage the pain afterwards. 10 to 12% of those were addicted to opioids the year after. And the inclusion criteria was that they were not addicted to opioids when they got their wisdom teeth pulled. So their first exposure to opioids were basically when they got the wisdom teeth pulled out, and then they got opioid addicted. So can you find something that have a better pain-killing effect than the existing products that are OTC and can replace opioids? I think we are hopefully saving a lot of people from getting opioid addicted, and consequently breaking this curve. And right now we have more than 70,000 people who died 2017. Looks like being approximately the same number as 2018. So this is a severe problem. And reflected in the market development that we're looking at, we saw a 14.1% in the last quarter. We continued this year to see the same growth quarter over quarter, or quarter over year. So this first month of 19 over the first month of 2018. So we've seen an accelerating growth. In 2018 over 2017, it was 13%. The year before it was 12%. So we see an upwards going trend. And positively enough, Zubsolv, our main brand, is outgrowing the market on the 2 reimbursed segments, whereas in the cash segments, meaning patients who are paying out of pocket, we are losing. And that's basically because there are now 10 generics in the market with another formulation that are cheaper than Zubsolv. But when you get to those who get reimbursement and get insurance coverage, we actually gain market share, as you can see on this picture, where we are the only branded product that actually grows significant double-digit in the market. So looking at the way it has worked in the US, we have worked a lot through insurance companies, and every time we make a big leapfrog upwards, or even when we lose, it's explained by differences in reimbursement by insurance companies. And every single pharmaceutical in the market, whether being an NCE or like us, a drug delivery formulation, will need to consider how are we going to address the insurance market in the US. And as you saw early last year, we took a big jump upwards. We got Caremark, where we got access. We've been blocked for Caremark in 2 years, so we lost them over here. We got Humana and Envision as an exclusive, so we're the exclusively preferred product within those plans, and that gave us this jump. And then we're basically grown with the market. The dip you see here is the Christmas week, which is of course always is low, and this year there was very few selling days. Looking a little ahead in this market, we have a couple of new competitors. We have Sublocade from Indivior. It's a depot formulation that was launched. The Swedish company Camurus got their product approved in December. Then someone had missed that there was an exclusivity associated with Sublocade, so they won't start selling before, I think, end of 2020, probably with the launch 2021. Then they are probably going to launch a weekly depot in the interim. But we'll see how that will fly. I think there are a lot of arguments that the monthly depot is more attractive. But this one up here has really not made any traction. It's marginal. There's no impact. It's very few physicians who prescribe, and the market that they got is within a very few institutions in the US. So there's no broad uptake of these depot formulations. The big change in this market will be the last point here, and that's our major competitor, the elephant in the market, Suboxone, are losing their exclusivity, and we will probably see Alvogen and Dr. Reddy, now it looks like next week, are likely to launch a generic in the market into the US. You have 65% of the market sitting with Suboxone film, and with generic competition coming in, they're likely to lose most of that. And that creates a lot of interesting market dynamic, which of course can both be a risk, but also come with several opportunities. Just in a favor of time, I will not talk so much about the depot formulation, because right now they're really marginal for us. We don't see any of our prescribers who are using this in any greater extent. It is big institutions where we are not really present who have been starting to prescribe some Sublocade. So I jump that and go to the generics. And here's the interesting thing with the US market is that we already have 10 generics in the market. So whatever sales we have today is done in competition with 10 generics with the same clinical profile as Zubsolv. The way it works for the insurance companies is that unless the generics are going to do what we call a race to the bottom, where they basically launch below their own cost to get down the cost, they will have a big difficulty to get below the price that both Orexo but also Suboxone with Indivior have been priced for the insurance companies. So if you look at the price we are giving to insurance companies, we're likely to have a lower price than what the insurance companies will have for generics. Last week we saw the list price coming out for the generics, and we actually saw one of the large fee-for-service Medicaid companies in the US blocking the generic Suboxone film and putting Zubsolv in on a preferred position. So I think that will be interesting to see, can we convert some of this, because we are already competing in a price environment where we have generics, and these film formulations are likely to be more expensive than the tablet formulations in the market. And then, of course, as I talked before, what is important for us is, do we get market access? And when you look at the private insured plans in the US, so people with a private health insurance, we have nearly 100% coverage. We thought we couldn't get beyond 95. We got 97 early this year with North Carolina, Blue Cross in North Carolina adding us on a preferred status. The one that's been a challenge for us is Medicaid, and that's why we have seen a lot of the growth coming, and we've not really had the same market access in Medicaid as we have seen in the private insured space. But as you can see, we took a big jump upwards, and this is really where I believe contrasts what you would expect. But I actually think that here, with the Indivior losing their exclusivity on Suboxone, we have an opportunity to improve this number. Simply because our price to these insurance companies after rebate is likely to be below what the generic film are launching when they come into the market. Finally, on our numbers, so here we have the group net revenues is so $84 million, so less than 800 million SEK, of which Zubsolv, the growth of Zubsolv, the growth in this has been 22% year over year, and Zubsolv is actually the one driving the growth to 28% growth. Our EBIT was $13 million, with a very strong growth from last year. Our US EBIT, which is quite interesting because that's what we call the core business. The US is what's going to finance our business in R&D and the business development. That's 22 million or 198 million SEK. So our US business is contributing with 198 million to our overall core business. So you could say, should we stop R&D? Should we stop driving these legal litigation processes? This is the profitability we would end up with. Interesting here is that we see this is going to grow and expand, not only driven by volume growth, but actually driven by significant improvement in our cost of goods. So we expect our cost of goods to go down with 35% compared to 2017, or about 20% compared to 2018. Finally, our cash position, I think this is what is needed for a company. I think most of the companies you listen to today are talking about how we're going to finance the pipeline development and when is the next share issue. But for us, it's really about how can we find places to invest this money into growing the business further. Just to round off, I think we have a little unique situation now. It's in pharma, nearly unbelievable. We have a 13 years to work with Zubsolv in the US with our exclusivity. We're in a market that is growing significantly, and we're doing that from a very strong financial position. So even though we see significant competition into the US, I actually think some of that competition can be converted into an advantage. And that's really what my job is, my management team's job is, to ensure that we are the fastest, most agile company in this industry. And I'm pretty sure we are. And right now we had an ambition on the front page to become the world's leader in addiction medicine. Maybe not because of our own success of selling, but now because of our biggest competitors seeing generic competition. At least if we look at the branded products, we are probably on a good way to become the world leader with the largest branded product sales of any company. With that, I will open up for questions.
Thank you, Nikolaj. Very interesting. So obviously, as shown there you have a strong focus on contracts with the insurance companies. Who pay for the sales of Zubsolv. Mm-hmm. Could you briefly describe how this system works with insurance companies, and also why do they choose Zubsolv over generics?
So for most of the insurance companies, they have what you call an annual cycle. So you have to, every year, they come with a request around Easter, and you have to fill in what is the rebate that you offer. And you can place a rebate which is called, you often have the generics as one category, and then you have branded. And for the branded, we are bidding for what we call one of one brand. That's we basically are the only brand that is preferred, or we could be accepting to be 2 brands, or we could be accepting to have an open access. And then we're bidding for what kind of tier we are going to be in, and the tier means how much is the patient going to pay themselves. This is the one that is interesting with Suboxone, is that they have paid a lot of these Medicaid plans to be one brand. But when they have generic competition, they can't be one brand anymore. And that's what I think will be open up for us, because they will get into the generic category, and most of the insurance companies actually want to have a branded product as an alternative. And why do they choose Zubsolv? There are 2 reasons. One is that we do have a quite aggressive pricing strategy in these negotiations, especially if we can get an exclusive position. But the other part is that we have seen that when patients are moving from Suboxone to Zubsolv, they've seen the overall utilization to drop. And then we try to understand why, and the only explanation that the insurance companies come up with is that the patients actually got it overprescribed, probably to sell it on the street. And some patients might even got it prescribed without needing it, just to sell it on the street. And with choosing Zubsolv, as we're not as attractive on the street, and that's a longer story, then they've actually chosen us. And that's exactly the story with Humana and Envision. They choose us because they saw that this was a way that they could minimize the diversion into into the street selling.
Okay, so you obviously you have quite a few contracts already, and how important is the correlation between the reimbursement and your market share, the Orexo's market share, because it's been quite constant there, 5-6%.
Yeah, it's always amazes me that when you win somewhere, then suddenly you lose somewhere else. That's a little the situation right now, even though we have not really lost reimbursement, but we were taking off an exclusive contract, which would cost us a little volume with a plan called WellCare. At the same time, we got open up in Ohio. We see very strong growth in Ohio right now, but from a small base. So you kind of compensate the 2, and your market share is hovering around the same number. If we had kept WellCare, then the Ohio would have been, as an exclusive, would have been positive. But there's no doubt, if you look into the exclusive contracts in Orexo, it's about half of the volume. The other half is in competition. But we see less and less exclusive. And the positive part is that when we have lost an exclusive deal, we've actually seen a lot of the patients stay on the brand. So even though they could choose another brand, they have stayed on the brand. And that will be with WellCare. It was the same when we lost the exclusive Maryland. We also lost the exclusive. Both of these will generate much more profit to the company after we lost the exclusivity, because the rebates are much, much less when we're in competition. So one thing is to steer yourself blind on the market shares, but I'm getting a little more blind looking at the bottom line contribution. But of course you want to have volumes so you can save money in manufacturing. But right now we're shipping 400,000 tablets every week, 400,000. And that means that we're already up in the top scale of where you are in manufacturing. So I don't think we can save that much more for more scale in manufacturing.
But then, as you mentioned, your main competitor, Suboxone Film, facing quite a lot of generic competition now going forward. Are you at risk of then losing any of your existing contracts, would you say, or to be forced to lower the price?
I think so. I have to admit, and we write that in our outlook, is that we do see that there is an added market risk right now. There's an uncertainty because there's a behavior that I can try to predict based on logic. How would I behave if I was Dr. Reddy? It was one of those generic companies. We're talking to former generic executives to try to understand how they would behave. But you never really know. And there's that risk that you suddenly have Dr. Reddy and Alvogen starting to compete this race to the bottom where they start selling below their cost of goods. And we've seen that before. And if that happens, you might suddenly have a price that is competing with Zubsolv or maybe even below. And I think it's not those, but then they might push the generic players who are with the tablets even further down below, because right now we are about the same price. And that in itself could create some of these exclusive contracts to say either you have to pay more rebate or we will open up for competition. I don't think they will take us off, but that they will open up for competition, of course, with half of the market share come from exclusive contracts could be a challenge. But then there are the more, I think this is the irrational thinking, but sometimes there are logics that I'm not aware of. The other factor is that if they don't, they actually come in with a average price, and that's what the list price is right now, is much higher than where we are after rebate. And you have pharmacies who are forced to switch from Suboxone film to the generic version. Then there are no contract with Suboxone film, and the insurance companies actually look at the price, which is higher. And in that situation, there's an open field for us to create a lot more access, especially in the public space where we have not had the same access. And then on top of that, I can see the dream scenario is that should we also see that patients dislike the film from Dr. Reddy, and that's the first evidence we got. They were on the market for 1 day during the summer. Is that film not perceived as effective or bad tasting or slower dissolving? Suddenly you have a patient pull for another product, and the only branded product in the market is actually ours. So that is my dream scenario, a little higher prices, and the patients dislike that product. And then suddenly you have 65% of the market, which is up for grabs. Can we take 10% of that? Then we're more than doubling our market share. Is that possible? Absolutely. But I would say that it's really depending on market dynamics we are out of control of.
That was a dream scenario.
That was my dream, yeah.
What would be the nightmare scenario?
No, the nightmare is that first of all, you have 2 Alvogen and you have Dr. Reddy who have announced they will launch. You have Indivior coming with the authorized generic. But then Indivior have some settlement agreements with 2 other companies, Mylan and one more. And Mylan has an approved product. Should they decide to launch at risk as well, or have an agreement with Indivior that open up, so you suddenly have 4 or 5 generics, and you start to see this price spiral. And you see the generic companies with a tablet who's not in the film market lowering their prices as a response. Then, of course, we can see a situation where we would need to improve our rebates, which would put a pressure on price. And I must say it's not like we're out of business, especially with our cost of goods. It's going to be much lower, but of course some of that improvement in cost of goods will then be eaten up by higher rebates. And both of these scenarios are likely. So it really in the next couple of weeks will be very, very exciting.
Very much. We are running out of time at this point. You will be able to elaborate further in the interview with my colleague Linus in a while.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nikolaj.
Thank you.
Next up, our final company to present today are actually, well, you could say that they are at the other end of the scale as far as development. That's not very nice to say that, is that?
You should use this Monty Python quote. And now for something completely different.
Now for something completely different. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lipum, presented by CEO Einar Pontén.
Is this the pointer? Yes. Okay. Yeah, well, it's not absolutely completely different. But as mentioned, we are in the other end. We are a preclinical company. And we are located in Umeå, and a result of the research at Umeå University Hospital. And we are not yet listed on any stock market list. But there is also another thing that differentiates us from others, and that is that Lipum belongs to one of the 2-3% of European small and medium-sized companies that have received the Horizon 2020 grant. And that is regardless of technology. So this is in competition with artificial intelligence whatsoever. And one could then wonder, why do we receive this? Well, then I would like to go back 20 years or so in time and talk about one of the founders of the company, Professor Olle Hernell. He's professor in pediatrics, so he was studying the nutrition of newborn children and the fat uptake from breast milk. And he discovered a protein, and the protein is bile salt stimulated lipase. And in fact, it is a protein that has importance for the nutrition of the newborn children. But during this research, they found that it was also present in the bloodstream, and that was not what they expected. So it turned out that everybody has this protein in the bloodstream. So they thought maybe it's secreted from the liver. So they asked colleagues to get samples of livers. And In one sample, it turned out to be very, very high level of this protein. And it turned out that that patient had fatty liver, and fatty liver is an inflammatory condition. And that was a starting point. They realized, maybe this protein has a role in the development of chronic inflammation. So they started to do studies, preclinical studies, testing, investigating the role of the target molecule, the BSSL protein, and they used genetically modified mice that don't have the protein and cannot produce the protein. And they used it first in a model called collagen-induced arthritis model, and that is a very well established, internationally recognized model for rheumatoid arthritis. That is in Swedish ledgångsreumatism. And you know, these diseases, you don't have very objective measures on this disease. You cannot measure an individual parameter and tell that you have rheumatoid arthritis. It's the physicians that have the diagnosis. That means that the disease is expressed in a kind of score. The higher score, the worse it is. And then if you expose mice to this collagen in this test, during treatment, they become sicker and sicker and sicker. But if you do the same thing with the mice that don't have this protein and cannot produce the protein, they are more or less unaffected. It's so silent. I mean, you should be applauding, because first indication, yes, this protein has a role in the inflammatory process. Later on, this was also studied in another model called dextrane sulfate sodium induced colitis. And this is the colon after treatment. And there you can see that the wild type mice, the colon is more or less destroyed, while the mice that are not having the protein are almost unaffected. So the approach then is that, can we treat inflammation by blocking this protein? Well, looking into the mechanism, it was figured out that the BSSL protein is released from the neutrophils, binds to the monocytes, stimulates monocytes to migrate to the site of inflammation, and maintaining the inflammation. So if we can trap the protein, then maybe we can prohibit also the migration and the inflammation. But how do we trap it? Yeah, well, testing by small molecules, it turned out that small molecules cannot be that specific. So it was concluded one need an antibody that is very highly specific to bind the BSSL and to inhibit this migration. So the product that should be developed, that is a therapeutic antibody. Then using an antibody, so inducing an arthritis, and this is the pristine-induced arthritis model. Inducing the arthritis on a control, then the control animals are ill. But if they are treated, and regardless of the way of the administration of experimental antibodies, you can see that if they get the antibody, they are significantly less affected. And this is also illustrated very clearly in these photos. The control are really ill, while the animals that receive the antibody are less affected. Then looking into people having rheumatoid arthritis, and thanks to the advisory board member, Professor Solbritt Dahlqvist, we have access to patients and patient samples. And this is blood samples from patients having rheumatoid arthritis, and monitoring then the concentration of the target protein in the blood. And if we look on this side, we can see that there is some kind of correlation between the concentration in the blood and the activity of the disease. Although it's rather scattered, it's hard to see. But if you differentiate the patients, because these diseases, they have relapse and remission. And when the disease is active during relapse, you can also see that the target protein concentrations are high, while when they are feeling better, then the protein concentration is low. A similar pattern is also seen when these patients are treated with one of the dominating drugs, that is an TNF-alpha inhibitor drug, Remicade in this case. So when they are treated and the patient are feeling better, also the concentrations of the BSSL molecule is decreased. The rheumatoid arthritis market is huge. You can see that over the last 5 years, it has increased by 50%. It's around about $30 billion today. And there are several reasons for that. And because these highly specific and efficient biological drugs are used more earlier in treatments, in the treatment of them, because the price have come down. Patients are treated with a more sophisticated drug earlier in the process, which means that the market in value increases. Still these are blockbusters, but still, round about 1/3 of the patients are non-responders. They actually have no help of the drug. And another 30% loses the effect after a couple of years, which means that the physicians need to re-challenge the disease with other biologics. And at some point, there is no other alternative, and the disease will have a progression. You probably heard about biologicals, the pricing of them. Here we have some of these TNF-alpha inhibitors, well-known blockbusters. And the treatment, based on the statistics from US insurances, is pricing between $20,000 to $50,000 per year. But in some cases, like Ilaris, that is used for a rare disease, the systemic juvenile arthritis that affects children, then it's almost $400,000 in cost for 1 year treatment. And because of the background of the founders of Lipum, they have been very well aware of the medical need among children for this juvenile idiopathic arthritis, or GIA. There is a high medical need and there is a high market, despite the fact that it's a rare disease. And since it's a rare disease, it's possible to get an orphan drug designation. And that is what Lipum are aiming for as well. So you see in the treatment tree that in the first step you get some anti-inflammatory, and then you go down in the treatment tree, and when this doesn't work, then you end up in the third line where you have the TNF-alpha inhibitors, and then when they don't work, you are in the fourth line, and there you can find we have this Ilaris that is around about $400,000 per year. And Lipum are aiming for the third and fourth line treatment of the juvenile arthritis. And that means that we see the juvenile arthritis as a possibility to apply for an orphan drug designation and bring it to phase 2 studies, clinical proof of concept on our own, while other indications like rheumatoid arthritis or even psoriasis arthritis or IBD, they are far too large indications, require too much patience for be possible for Lipum to manage. So there we need absolutely partnering to be able to proceed in that direction. Okay, so here we have the founders, Professor Olle Hernell, Susanne Lindqvist, and Lennart Lundberg. And the board of directors is led by very well experienced leader in pharma is Ulf Björklund. We also have a very active advisory board with Rickard Holmdahl at Karolinska Institute working with the inflammatory biomarkers. And we have consultants and other partners that are necessary for our progress. And then in particular, very important, SciLife Lab. The researchers received a grant at this National Center for Molecular Biosciences that are in Uppsala in Stockholm. And the grant works in a way that you don't get the money, but you get the qualified support in the development and optimization of a therapeutic antibody. And that work has been finalized now. Still, the owners have the majority, the founders have the majority of the company. Maybe this will change now in the new share issue that we are doing right now. And at the moment, we have just selected the drug candidate. And that is, of course, a result of years of development and optimization. And now we have a humanized monoclonal antibody that will, signing contract next week, will be forward to a contract manufacturer that will have cell line development, setting up the production method. And we will get material during this process. And next year we will have material for starting the tox studies. In parallel, we'll produce material for the clinical trials. That means that clinical trials can start in the beginning of 2021. And this is rather straightforward. In parallel, of course, the preclinical work will be continued, and we are especially interested in exploring this wide range of autoinflammatory, autoimmune diseases that are in this field. It's not only rheumatoid arthritis or juvenile arthritis. There are hundreds of diseases in this field that need better treatment. Okay, so how have we proceeded? Yeah, above this line we have the grants. Below we have investments. If we look backwards, initially this project was, the company was supported by Novo Nordisk through these Novo Seeds funds, Umeå Biotech Incubator, and of course then the SciLife Lab has been very important. But also European Union early granted a small amount, and later on then, just recently, 23 million SEK. In parallel, Alma Invest became shareholders. Later on, the management and others have invested, like business angels. And right now we have a new share issue that will close on Sunday. If anyone is interested, there are documents to fill in outside. And this looks like this. So we have a pre-money valuation of 58 million. Then we have cash, 23 from the European Union. And we will offer 30% approximately of the company. And I don't know what time it is, but I thank you for your attention. And I think it's time for questions.
Thank you. Very interesting. You kind of laughed a little bit when you said that there are documents to fill in if you're interested into investing. But I know that for a fact that you have found investors through BioStock when you've been here earlier.
Yeah. That's
it's not a joke. It's for real.
Credit to you.
Thank you. So there are many autoimmune diseases, inflammatory diseases. Why did you specifically choose to start with this juvenile idiopathic arthritis?
Yeah, well, it is based, of course, on preclinical proof of concept. It works in these models that relates to the juvenile arthritis. That's one thing. The other thing is awareness of the medical need. And the third thing is expertise in treatment of children. So our founders, typically pharma companies don't want to do clinical trials on children and pregnant women. But in our case, we have the expertise on clinical trials on children. So it's a good combination. And you can also say that even though it's a rare disease, it's around about 300,000 patients globally. Okay, and we can only we can only approach the third and the fourth line treatment. Still, that constitutes a market around about 2.5 million, 2.5 billion euro. So you become a little bit surprised about that, because the pricing of the drugs are so high, like Ilara is close to 400,000. That's one thing, and there is obviously also less good alternatives.
So statistically looking at rare disease drugs, they do command usually a higher price. What are the odds of Lipum getting the orphan drug designation?
I think that is very good. I don't expect any problem with that, actually, because we have already checked that. Okay. Of course, you need it from the authorities as well, but it's very much you look into the statistics. How many have the disease? Then the other thing is that you should not apply for an orphan designation because you intend to do something else. No. The authorities don't like that, but otherwise I think it's a good chance to get it. Yes.
You mentioned earlier that you had early financing or backing from Novo Seeds, and I know the big pharma companies, they of course they are interested in orphan drug designation as well. When you go around meeting potential future partners, how important is that to them?
No, I don't think that is the most important. The most important thing is something that is extremely unusual with Lipum, and that is that we have a new target for treatment of autoimmune chronic inflammatory diseases. That is something they never heard of. In fact, when we started to actually meet them around about 2 years ago, meeting them at Pharma, big Pharma expertise at big Pharma, they were like, never heard about it. Could it really be true?
Is that an advantage or is it an obstacle?
I think it's for a small company, I think it's an advantage initially that you can be working all alone for some time. But of course, once the results start to come, then the interest will increase. And big Pharma is definitely interested, but their approach is that, okay, come back once you have the
clinical data.
No, come back once you have the physical product. Once you have the humanized antibody that we can test in our models. And of course, that is one of the things we aim to do, to invite them to collaborate and test our antibody in other disease models than rheumatoid arthritis or IBD or so forth.
What about production? Is that a risk when you use humanized monoclonal antibodies?
No, well, I don't. I think that the development and setting up production methods today is relatively straightforward. There is a lot of companies offering these services, and the skills are today much better. So it's relatively straightforward. Okay, we can have problem with biological molecules, but you don't need that. That's not much of a risk, I think, any longer. But that's still a substantial cost. So from today to have the GMP material in your hand, it's probably around about 5 million euro.
And you're right now you're doing like you said, a financing round, aiming to collect around 2.5 million euro.
Yes.
Yeah. And we're very close.
Okay. To have it also already. So.
Yeah. How long will that take you then in the process?
Yeah, I listened to a previous presenter, and we plan. I showed it on the slide also. We plan a next round, the first quarter next year, and that is a little bit depending also because we have been in contact with around about 90 venture cap companies. We have 20 that say that they are interested in our progress, but small companies, it's a little bit too early for them. It's a little bit too small money. So of course,
because they actually want to invest larger amounts.
They want to invest larger amounts, but they also want to wait. So for that reason, the board had a strategic decision that okay, next year we should be prepared. So we have different alternatives, and one alternative, if we prepare ourselves for a listing at the at the first north or so. Then we have options next year. So that is why so you could call it a pre-IPO in the beginning of next year. But I don't think we will have options. That's clear.
Okay. So then, if anyone who's here today will be interested into investing in Lipum, how would they go about it practically? Just talk to you after in the break?
And fill in the form and leave it to me. That's it. That's as easy.
As easy as that.
Yeah, of course. Then it's the board that decides who you get the opportunity.
Okay.
To become a shareholder.
There's an amount of vetting involved as well. Well, Einar, good luck with the financing round and the project, of course. Yeah. Looking forward to hearing more about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was actually the final presentation for today. We will be posting that this has been live broadcast, but we will also post it after the fact. So you will be able to go back and look at the presentations at your convenience. And after the presentations, each company has been doing an interview, a separate interview, and that will also be published probably next week. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for today. See you next time.